January 1945. Cologne, Germany. Frosted road, a half-track, ahead of two Opel trucks, a towed flak gun, rocking lightly. The first clue is not the engine note, but the voice of metal itself, the flat percussive bark of Browning M2, 50 caliber coming on in a sheet. AP-47 drops like a lid, and 8 M2s open together. APIT rounds stride the canvas of the lead truck, and the fabric simply ceases to exist. Half-inch holes walk through the cab glass and out the door seam. The hot coin stink that follows is gasoline meeting tracer. Hands fly to the flak shield, to the traverse wheel, to the script that says one good burst will scare a single fighter wide. The script did not meet the 50. The next 2-second burst is measured almost gentle, the guns chattering in perfect cadence, brass raining into the ditch. The half-track tries to quarter its armor, and the M2 line ignores the idea of fairness, sewing along the sideboards, skipping off the shield, finding the soft things men keep under benches because they think steel will negotiate. Left of the road, a freight engine, whistling out of habit, takes a diagonal of half-inch light across its boiler. Steam avalanches forward, and the couplings snap, wagons folding into each other, as if the train remembered it should be smaller. Right of the column, a gunner with cold fingers drags his sights too late and meets the American answer again. Browning fire hammering the mount, the grips suddenly teeth. For an instant, the world is only the cadence thud, 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 8 voices, 1 language. The fighters do not loiter. They step fire, climb step again. 2 seconds correction, 2 seconds gone. Telephone wire slung low over the ditch parts under a stray string of 50, and hangs humming a black necklace that will not carry orders. Snow ticks on hot metal, cartridge cases cool like rain. A door swings on a hinge that forgot its job. The quiet that settles is not mercy, not fear. It is the after-sound of the Browning M2, a silence that weighs more than noise. By early 1945, Germany is running on promises. Fuel is rationed to memories. Pilot training is a rumor, and yet the old catechism still circulates. A tiger can lock a street, an ace can tear open, a bomber box, a bold column can beat the weather. America answers with a sound rather than a speech. Jimmy Doolittle has already loosed the escorts to range at will, not just babysit and Elwood are. Quesada has turned fighter groups into roadnet predators. The instrument that makes those decisions felt at ground level is half an inch wide and American standard everywhere. On wings, the arithmetic is cruel. A P-47 carries 8 Browning M2, 50 caliber guns and roughly 3,000 rounds. A P-51D carries 6, enough for several 2-second passes that look like measurement more than fury. A B-17G bristles with a dozen or more. 50 seconds, so that a Luftwaffe pilot closing from stern or beam must thread a moving lattice of tungsten and flame just to begin his attack. The numbers are not decoration. They are flight time in bursts. They are the difference between 1 pass and 3. They are the reason a German gunner's courage has to outlast mathematics. The ground learns even faster than the air. Ring mounts bloom on jeeps, half-tracks and turrets. Convoy commanders talk about vertical coverage the way they used to talk about flank security. Quesada's tactical air forces call it armed reconnaissance and make it a weekday habit. Rail lines scored at boiler height, bridges strafed at the abutments, columns punished at the bottlenecks where drivers cannot decide quickly enough which way safety lies. When the weather opens, roads are not roads. They are firing lanes drawn in half-inch strokes. German names stand inside this pressure and feel it change shape. Adolf Galland understands that an intercept ending inside 500 meters now crosses a zone no man controls for long. The approach itself has become a duel with American gunners who do not tire and do not flinch. On the ground, Walter Model's armies discover that a quiet sector at noon can flash into catastrophe in 90 seconds because a pair of Thunderbolts saw dust on a bend. Veteran crews, once confident behind a gun shield, learn that shields were made for rifles, not for a weapon that walks through radiators, tires, cupolas, and the thin places of pride. The stakes are not abstract. If German movement by day can survive, formations retain initiative, and the front retains shape. If daylight becomes a tax paid in fire staffs, must choose between speed and survival, and the calendar bleeds away. For the Americans, the wager is brutal but clear. Maintain tempo, shorten the war, trade fuel and cartridges for weeks of combat not fought. For Germany, the wager is tragic. Believe that aura and nerve still bend physics or adapt to the fact that physics has been standardized and shipped by the crate. Every detail resolves to seconds. 2-second bursts, 2-second corrections, 2 seconds to decide whether a bridge is still a bridge when you reach it. The Browning M2 is not magic and not new. It is simply present in suffocating quantity, stable on platforms that keep arriving disciplined by checklists that punish improvisation. That ubiquity is why the moment on the frost road matters beyond its smoke. It says out loud that the last comforts the idea that boldness can erase disadvantage, that a single strong machine can freeze a street, are now paid for at half an inch, and the bill is due every time the sky is clear. The weapon's truth lives in seconds. A Browning M2. 50 caliber throws a half-inch bullet fast enough that a 2-second burst from 8 guns on a P-47 lays a bright ruler-straight saw across a road. Aircraft mounts cycle far quicker than the ground tripod. The cadence is a continuous sheet rather than single knocks, and the tracers burn long enough that a pilot can correct inside his own light. At 200 to 400 meters, the pattern is dense, forgiving small aim errors, and still finding the soft places that matter. Radiators, tires, fuel caps, gun shields, vision slits, the thin backs of turrets, the joints where a locomotive breathes. Numbers are not decoration here, they are behavior. A P-47 commonly carries thousands of rounds split across 8 Brownings, which means multiple measured passes, 2 seconds on break, 2 seconds again, without going empty. A P-51D carries 6 guns with deep belts. The practical effect is the same, several attacks each long enough to be decisive and short enough to stay out of light flak. A B-17G or B-24 mounts a forest of 50 seconds, so that a Luftwaffe pilot closing from stern or beam must fly through a moving fence before he can even pick his killing angle. Crews talk in distances and angles because the weapon encourages that language. Courage does not beat geometry at 300 yards, when the sky itself seems to emit half-inch fire. German gear is not made of rumour. An SD, KFZ, 251 half-track, can bully rifles and shrug splinters. A Panzer IV carries real steel on its nose. But the 50 does not argue about front if it can choose side or back, and it is perfectly happy to kill a vehicle by subtraction puncture. The radiator, shred cables, peel tires, smash periscopes, break gun sights, turn a shield into a sieve and let heat and time do the rest. Gun crews, who once felt safe behind 10-12mm plates, discover that those plates were designed against bullets that arrive thinner and slower. Even when armor holds, everything around it hoses optics, external stowage, exposed men is mortal to a weapon that writes in wide strokes. Gun sights turned physics into procedure. With the K-14 gyro sight arriving to frontline Mustangs late in 1944, the first steady sight picture comes faster and costs less airframe motion. Pilots do not chase, they solve. The M2 rewards that steadiness hold 2 seconds, and the pattern prints exactly where the sight promised, even with engine vibration and slipstream tugging at the wings. On the ground, the same idea becomes ring mount discipline. A half-track's top gun can quarter a hedgerow or a church window and deny it to Panzerfaust teams. The rule is elevation, first, traverse, second. Waste nothing because the belt is long but not infinite, and every 2-second string must matter. Patterns repeat because they are designed to. A freight engine idling at a rural halt takes a diagonal of 50 across the boiler at 200 meters. Steam avalanches, forward couplings snap, and the train turns into its own barricade. 2 roads away, a flakwagen tries to hold a junction. A Thunderbolt steps in shallow, draws a bright line through the shield, and the ready ammo box, and the mount spits its last cartridges straight up like a failed argument. On an airfield, a Bf-109 with canopy open taxis to the hold, hears the wrong engine, and the first pass stitches the wing route so cleanly that the second pass is unnecessary. The men on the ground will call it bad luck. The gun camera will call it repeatable. Weakness cuts both ways, and the Americans admit it in their checklists. The 50 will not break the front of a Panther at urban fighting distances, and no one trains to try. The answer is to change the geometry. Attack the convoy before it reaches the town, rake the side, break the track, kill the tow, make the road itself the trap. In the air, gunners memorize arcs, because a single undisciplined burst at the wrong moment leaves a lane that an expert like Adolf Galland can sniff and use. The cure is overlap, not heroism. Elwood Quesada's fighter groups and Jimmy Doolittle's free-roaming escorts embody that cure, saturate the sky and the road net with enough half-inch voice that individual brilliance drowns in procedure. What matters to the man inside the moment is simpler. At 200 meters, the first steady sight wins in 3 seconds. The M2 makes steady happen while everything shakes. If the burst lands, the target does not argue. A truck becomes a lantern, a gun shield becomes a question. A plan becomes smoke you can smell, and a second target waits a field away, ready to learn the same lesson before anyone can pretend the first was an accident. The road feels routine until it doesn't. The column has the practiced slack of men who know the route. Opel trucks spaced by habit, the SD, KFZ, 251, with its 2 centimeters mount riding lightly. The towed 3.7 centimeters parked, where a junction opens the field of fire. Hans keeps his gloves on the traverse grips, because the steel eats skin in January. They have done this in daylight before. Orders say weather is marginal, clouds low, and Walter Model's maps mark this stretch as quiet. The flak shield is comfort more than armor. 12 millimeters will stop rifle rounds and spirits, and most days spirits are the stronger. The first hint is not sound but shadow. A shape cuts across the roofline, too squared for a 109, too wide for a Stuka. Then the noise arrives like a sheet pulled straight. The Browning M, 2 cadence half-inch hammers in mechanical unison. Hans turns the mount into the pass and feels the handle grate his palm. The sights lift, and the first tracer he sends is hopeful rather than aimed. The return is not hopeful. It is a line of APIT that walks through canvas like scissors, and then under the truck's bench, where someone stored a petrol can against orders. Heat rolls back against the shield, and the shield for the first time feels like a question. He tries to remember the script, track the second fighter, lead him, make him wide, but the second fighter is already stepping in flatter than the first 2 seconds of perfect sewing brass, clattering into the ditch like small coins being counted fast. The gun's ready ammo box spits cartridges straight up, when a round bites through its side, and for an instant the mount looks like it is applauding its own failure. Behind him a corporal shouts for the Schwer 3. 7 to unlimber. The driver answers with noise and no movement because a tire is now lace. Left of the road a train had been dozing with steam up. Its whistle bleats in confusion when a diagonal of half-inch light stitches the boiler. Couplings snap 2 cars back, and wagons fold into themselves, a concertina of iron that will not be persuaded. Hans keeps the sights high because years of instruction say that height buys seconds and seconds are life. The instruction did not imagine 8 Brownings timed to 1 heartbeat. The fighters do not circle. They step, they fire, they leave as if someone above them were keeping minutes on a clipboard. In the cockpit, the world is procedure. The P-47's nose tips through the sight ring until the road fills a measured circle. Master arm is on, guns are live, and the pilot's breathing is the metronome that keeps Hans from doing anything clever. Armed recce. 2 trucks, 1 half-track light flak, 2 seconds. The voice on the radio is clipped. An Elwood Quesada. Product identify. Acquire fire. Relocate. There is no good luck. There is no be careful. The K-14 sight holds a solution, even while the airframe trembles in low, cold air. The pilot keeps the pipper steady and squeezes until the world becomes vibration, and the tracers walk exactly where the glass said they would. He does not watch the truck burn. He is already in the climb, counting 3, 4, 5, rolling to re-enter from the corner no one expects twice. Lead calls half-track right of road. Wingman answers tally. 2 seconds. The second pass is shallower. He watches the shield, not the men behind it. The line goes through the gun mount, through the ammo can, and the return fire stops so suddenly that silence feels like a physical thing in the canopy. Mount neutralized, shift left. He does not say, good hit. He says what the checklist says. The belt count matters in a way that feels like morality. 3,000 rounds divided into honest bursts is enough to erase a morning. 3,000 wasted in heroics is how flak masters get promotions. The pilot has flown escort under James H. Doolittle's freedom to roam order and has learned to hate loitering more than fear. The airplane is a drum under his palms when the Brownings run a steady, square recoil that says the mounts were bolted by men who cared more about alignment than romance. He trusts them. They have earned it in weather and in hours that never make the newsreel. Below, Hans drags the barrel across empty sky and begins to understand a different arithmetic. The flak wagon's shield was engineered to deny a rifleman not to receive a half-inch argument delivered at 1,100 meters per second in 8 parallel sentences. He smells hot coins and wet rope and realizes those smells will not leave his coat this month. Orders had said with the confidence of a typed sheet that the day would be cloudy enough for movement. Orders had not considered how quickly a patch of blue can become policy. The pilot's third pass is denied by his own rule set. 2 passes on light flak is discipline. 3 is gambling. He calls a break and climbs to a height where Panzerfausts are mythology. Lead truck burning. Half-track out. Check left tree line. The wingman reads a flash at the corner of the field, and they both ignore it, because experience says flashes at corners are sometimes nothing, and sometimes rifles that want to feel brave for a second. The airplane is loud in a way that feels private. The M2S, now quiet, have left a humming in his fingers that will be there through coffee. On the ground, Hans and the corporal pull the flak cart by hand because the engine will not answer. They do this with the blank competence of men who have pulled things their whole lives. A length of telephone wire droops near the ditch and hums a note that matches something in his teeth. The corporal says, not unkindly, that they will move at night. Night is a plan. Daylight has become a tax. In a briefing hut 50 kilometers away, a staff captain writes that armed reconnaissance has intensified and that road nets are to be considered contested on days with ceiling above 1,000 meters. He does not mention the smell or the wire or grips that feel like teeth. In another hut, an American intelligence officer pins a strip of Guncam footage to a board and draws a chalk line where the tracers walked. He says 2 seconds out loud, because that is the whole sermon. The half-inch voice itself will do the preaching tomorrow. The pilot taxis later that afternoon at a forward strip roughed into a beat field, checks the belts again, and runs a thumb across the breech cover as if it were a habit that protects him. The habit is actually for the gun. The gun pays him back by being exactly what the checklist believes it is. He thinks briefly of Francis Gabreski and Robert S. Johnson and men who learned the same lesson on other roads in other weather. The names are anchors, not talismans. He lifts into a sky that will be clear for 1 more hour. Below, Hans studies a map with the same cold intent and traces a night route with a pencil stub. Both men have learned something permanent about daylight, and neither can afford to forget. Hap Arnold wants pressure measured in hours, not speeches. Carl Sparts wants the transport net broken so completely that staff maps look like winter trees. Jimmy Doolittle gives fighter escorts permission to range ahead and down, not just orbit the bombers. Elwood Quesada fits radios to tanks and jeeps so pilots can be steered like artillery. The instrument all of them can afford to use everywhere is the Browning M2, 50 caliber, the same cartridge, the same recoil, the same simple headspace and timing ritual, repeated from England to the Ardennes. Doctrine hardens first in the air. Under Doolittle, the 8th Air Force teaches that an escort's job is to empty the sky, not merely to shepherd a box. That requires short, disciplined attacks, and the weapon encourages the disciplined 2-second strings. From 6 or 8 guns, place a dense, correctable pattern at 200 to 400 meters. Then the fighter is already climbing out of. Light flak. The K-14 gyro gun sight, arriving late 1,944 turns, pilot judgment into a computed pipper. The M2 rewards that steadiness by printing exactly where the sight predicts. Bomber groups write their own manual in parallel. AB-17G with chin, dorsal tail, waist and ball positions throws a defensive lattice of 50 fire so thick that a Luftwaffe ace must spend courage just to arrive at his firing solution. The lesson for the attacker is cruel. Even a perfect gunnery pass crosses a fence. Quesada's 9th Air Force turns half-inch into ground policy. Armed reconnaissance stops being a phrase and becomes a weekday factory schedule: rail cuts at the boiler bridges, raked at the abutments, convoys taxed at choke points. VHF control from forward air controllers and armoured radio jeeps lets pilots be stacked in a cab rank and tipped in on call. The standard run is short, shallow and unemotional. 2 seconds on the abutment, extend, re-enter from a fresh clock position, because the 50's weight of fire makes brevity lethal and loitering foolish. Ground SOP follows. Ring mounts bloom on half-tracks, Shermans and trucks. Commanders speak of vertical coverage as naturally as they once spoke of flanks. The same M2 that closes a runway at dawn deters a Panzerfaust at dusk from a cupola. Production makes doctrine cheap. The United States does not field special guns for special days. It stamps out Browning M2S in automotive plants and appliances factories, then stamps out the mounts to hold them. Frigidaire builds receivers. AC spark plug machines parts. Depots ship headspace gauges and spare barrels by the crate. A waist gun in a B. 24. A turret pair on a B. 17. A wing bank on a P. 47. A ring mount on a Jeep. All feed the same belts. All ask the same maintenance ritual. All accept the same API and tracer mixes that set fuel and timber alight and let shooters correct inside their own light. Interchangeability is not romance. It is why an armourer with a jeep and a canvas roll can return 10 guns to service before lunch. Ammunition policy finishes the picture. Belts run heavy on API and APIT because ignition and feedback matter more than abstract penetration against the targets that decide a campaign: tires, radiators, locomotives, open gun mounts, parked aircraft fuel stores. A P-47's 8 guns with deep belts allow several measured passes. A P-51D's 6 with nearly 2,000 rounds total do the same. The important number is not the exact round count, but the arithmetic of time: 2 seconds, break 2 seconds again, and still enough left to get home. Bomber defensive belts stacked across multiple stations create arcs that overlap by design. The hole a German pilot once expected to knife through is now a brief shifting slit that closes as quickly as it appears. Decisions at the top accept risk because the factory swallows loss. Doolittle's roaming escorts mean some fights start over enemy fields. Losses are the price of denying Germany the initiative. Quesada's insistence on low-level work means flak will find some airframes. The counter is to value tempo over perfection. Arnold and Spaatz sign orders that treat railroad marshalling yards, bridges and locomotives as primary targets in bad weather windows. The 50 is the weekday tool for those windows, when bombs are crude but bullets are precise. Operation Clarion, in February 1945, will formalize the transport first pressure, but the behavior is already there in January on every clear morning. If it moves by day, the half-inch voice has a vote. German staff work once built on nerve and scarce excellence cannot answer with quantity. Fuel rations starve training. Pilot hours dwindle, and new men arrive with skills that fit slogans better than dogfights. Flak wagons are heirlooms. Each loss is not just a tactical event, but a dent in a city's last armour. A Tiger's commander may still trust his steel, but his road net depends on trucks, and trucks dissolve under 2 seconds of M2 attention, regardless of who commands the Panzer Regiment. The result is behavioural move. At night, scatter by day, except that a patch of blue sky above a junction is now an American policy window. SOPs filter down to the level where fingers live. Bomber gunners drill arcs and call-outs until distances become reflex. Fighter pilots count belts in their heads and refuse a third pass on light flak because bursts are a budget, not a thrill. Tank commanders on the Western Front learn to keep the M2 hot and high in towns because a vertical hose of half-inch tracer through an attic window decides whether a corner belongs to you. Armourers carry headspace gauges as if they were rosaries. Barrels swap in minutes. A gun that stutters is a gun that is fixed before the next scramble. None of this is glamorous. All of it is repeatable. The contrast becomes philosophical. America fights like an assembly line, standard parts, standard drills, replaceable courage supported by logistics that arrive on time. Germany fights like a curator, unique machines guarded by dwindling experts, roads that need luck, fuel that needs prayer. The Browning M2 is the loudest sentence in that argument. It is not the only sentence bombs and rockets speak to, but it is the one that can be spoken from wings, from turrets, from rails, from cupolas, every clear day on demand. That is why decisions at Corps and Air Force level show up to a truck driver as a 2-second string of light. That is why the myth of daylight impunity dies not in a manifesto but in brass cooling in a ditch. It breaks first at the small scale where habit lives. A flak wagon rolls into a junction it has used all winter and finds that the sky has become a condition of the road. The crew obeys the script, shield angled belt, seated eyes on the hedges, and learns in 2 seconds that the shield was engineered for last year. The half-inch line finds the ready ammo box, the sight, the exposed wrists, and the problem is no longer nerve. It is physics delivered on schedule. Word travels faster than orders. By the next noon, the same town looks different. Trucks park under arches, carts pull into courtyards, bicycles carry messages the wire no longer dares to carry. Daylight is no longer a right, it is a loan issued by weather. In the air, the change feels like gravity. A Luftwaffe veteran who once closed to 200 meters on the beam of a B-17 now watches tracers arrive early, not as panic, but as geometry. The box he meant to cut has grown barbs. The waist positions that used to be men with guns are now overlapping sectors drilled until they resemble a machine. Even when he commits perfectly, the last half second before he squeezes is spent inside a fence of a 50 fire that does not blink. The old courage does not vanish. It becomes unfundable. After one pass, he grades the risk like a clerk and chooses to live. A staff officer will write intercept aborted due to heavy defensive fire, and the truth beneath it will be simpler. The approach itself has become the battle, and the Browning speaks first. Names anchor the shift. Adolf Galland had told anyone who would listen that escorts chained to bombers were a gift. The day James H. Doolittle cut the chain, Galland found the sky filled with fighters who were not waiting to be attacked. His men face P-47 seconds and P-51 seconds that arrive on their own terms, make one clean, measured pass with 6 or 8 Brownings, and then are gone before the flak can finish a sentence. The urge to press a second turn dies under arithmetic. A climb that once felt like hunting now feels like stepping into a saw. Post-war, he will put it in the clipped language of a professional that the escort's freedom made our attacks costly and uncertain. But the living version is the moment a pilot breaks off with fuel to spare and shame he cannot afford to. Indulge. On the ground, Walter Model's armies discover that a map can lie in good faith. A road inked as quiet at 0900 becomes an exposure at 0915 because a patch of blue opens and Elwood R. Quesada's controllers call in a pair already warming their guns. The doctrine looks impersonal on paper. Armed reconnaissance, cab rank control, 2-second bursts until it arrives as a smell and a noise. Hot coins wet rope, that flat mechanical bark that makes men crouch even when the pass is already over. Model directs dispersion and camouflage with the seriousness he once reserved for counterattacks. He is not conceding brilliance. He is conceding seconds. Tanks still matter, but the road net that feeds them is now a schedule, the enemy writes. Tactically, the legend dies a death of missed opportunities. Tank crews who once believed the cupola. 50 on a Sherman was an ornament, now learn to own windows and attic slits with vertical tracer. And German infantry who counted on Panzerfaust angles begin to respect a roofline they cannot. See. The tiger that bullied a street in 1943 still frightens at night. In 1945 at noon, it is mostly an address the enemy can find by sound. The half-inch is not a tiger killer from the front, and American crews do not pretend it is. They bend the fight until the vulnerable place is exposed, and then act like a checklist. A truck that would have slipped through last autumn becomes a lesson in radiators and tires. A locomotive that once promised movement becomes a barricade, pushed into itself by 2 seconds of fire. Repetition is the argument. No one calls it luck twice. Paperwork follows behind small and damning. A transport command memo warns that daylight road movement under clear skies is contested by hostile fighter bombers with heavy machine gun armament and orders that cargoes disperse into covered halts at the first sound. A Jagdgeschwader report notes that bomber formations open effective fire far earlier than the attack geometry allows, which is a formal way to say that the fence begins before the fight. On the Allied side, a 9th Air Force circular tightens the burst rule, 2 seconds, then climb, and lays out abutment aiming points for bridges like an assembly diagram. None of it is heroic, all of it is glue for behavior. The collapse has a second-layer pride repriced as inventory. A flak wagon lost in January cannot be replaced in February without stealing steel and hands from somewhere already starving. A trained driver burned out of a cab is not a statistic. He is a gap in a logistics line that has no slack. A Bf 109 written off on takeoff, because a strafing pass turned the runway into a pattern of holes, is not just airframe tonnage, it is fuel rubber time and a trainer's winter wasted. Against that ledger, the American choice looks brutal and efficient. Spend cartridges to save days, spend barrels to save bridges, spend engines to save lives. You would have lost fighting the old way. Hap Arnold's staff can write that arithmetic without apology because Detroit and Buffalo and Tulsa make the payments on time. Morale processes the change as rumor before it becomes policy. Drivers joke badly about the whispering gun that makes wire sing where it is cut. Infantrymen start trusting the sound of a friendly ring mount the way sailors trust a harbor light. Luftwaffe pilots who grew up on legends edit their stories down to weather windows and luck with flak. Do not press becomes wisdom, not cowardice. Move at night becomes discipline, not delay. The half-inch voice does not kill every target it speaks to. It kills the habit of pretending daylight is free. There is still venom in the old teeth. A clear-eyed German gunnery team can bloody a careless pass. A veteran interceptor can split a box if he arrives inside the single untidy moment when arcs do not overlap. A tiger in an alley with infantry screens can make an American platoon pay about as much as it did in 1944. But the confidence that stitched those acts into a myth, the certainty that the first burst would belong to Germany, is gone. The first burst now belongs to whoever carries the checklist that turns seconds into policy, and the Americans have printed that checklist on the side of a gun they bolt to everything. The day the legend dies is not famous. No city falls, no field changes hands. A road grows quiet in the afternoon, while men drag wrecks into a courtyard and try not to look at what the heat has done to paint and canvas. In a briefing hut, an American sergeant rewinds a Guncam strip and taps the chalk where the tracers walked exactly through a boiler dome. He says 2 seconds and the room nods because there is nothing else to say. In another hut, a German captain underlines avoid day movement under clear skies and adds again in the margin because it feels like a prayer and reads like a joke. That is the inflection. The monster does not become weak, it becomes rare, and rarity is a liability in a war that has learned to count. The last comfort that nerve and a strong machine could freeze a street or open a box by will is now purchased at a price set by a half-inch tool the Americans brought everywhere. After that, the tiger is not a legend at noon. It is an expensive target Germany cannot afford to risk. The ace is not a terror on schedule. He is a specialist who needs a sky the enemy will not rent to him anymore. The convoy is not a river. It is a series of puddles that wait for dark. The silence that follows the Browning is the sound of a myth closing. In the first week, the roads learn new manners. Wrecks are dragged into courtyards and covered with tarps that never quite hide the bends. Drivers rehearse dispersion like drill wagons. Tucked under arches at noon, messages moved by bicycle because wire cut by half-inch fire hums but does not speak. Staff notes follow sober and unadorned. Corps warns that movement by day under clear skies is to be treated as exposure. Rail authorities order boilers kept cold in daylight within fighter range. None of it is defeat. It is an admission that the sky now edits the map. Guncam strips travel faster than sermons. Intelligence sections pin frames to boards and draw chalk lines where the tracers walked. Instructors say 2 seconds until it becomes a reflex more than an order. Jimmy Doolittle's escorts keep ranging ahead, and the lesson spreads across fields and towns. If it moves when the ceiling is kind, it will be seen. If it is seen, a Browning M2 will write the next sentence. Elwood R. Quesada's controllers pass grids to pilots from radio jeeps and tank cupolas. Columns that once assumed quiet between villages discover that a patch of blue is now a policy window. German adjustments are practical rather than theatrical. Walter models formations scatter by day, pull tight by night, and put flak where it will not be found twice. Drivers count shadows rather than milestones. Airfields paint decoys, roll fighters into woods, and accept that a runway can become a pattern of holes as quickly as a morning becomes afternoon. A Jagdgeschwader report reduces pride to arithmetic bomber boxes, open effective fire earlier than an attack can develop, meaning the approach itself is the fight, and the fight is expended before the gun trigger feels familiar. Adolf Galland, already on record about the cost of free-ranging escorts watches that cost arrive as cancelled sorties, and men who choose to live rather than try a second turn inside a fence of 50 fire. On the American side, the weapon's ordinariness is its power. Armourers swap barrels on muddy hardstands with a headspace gauge and a habit. Belts of API and APIT arrive by the truckload. Ring mounts on Shermans and half-tracks are treated like duty posts, not trophies. A B-17, waist gunner's log looks like a carpenter's notebook, angles, ranges, bursts counted honestly, and the waist gun itself is just another M2 that a factory in Michigan could have built, or a shop in England could have fixed. Hap Arnold's staff writes schedules with the confidence of men whose tools are replaceable. The war becomes a question of tempo, and the 50 is the instrument ticking in the background. Operation Clarion will put an official stamp on what January already proved: the transport web can be shredded from low altitude by discipline as much as explosives. But even without a named operation, the behavior hardens. Bridges suffer at the abutments because pilots are taught to rake stone, not just span. Locomotives die diagonally because the aim point is the boiler's living edge. Columns learn that a half-track's cupola is a vertical veto. Attic positions, drawing a bead on a street, mouthfeel a hose of tracer where a window used to be. The weapon is not mythic, it is present. Morale processes the change in smells and rhythms. Hot coins wet rope the faint ozone after a telephone wire snaps. These become cues that daylight is taxed. Infantry begin to trust the sound of a friendly ring mount the way sailors trust harbour bells. German crews learn that the best day is a day no one saw. The aura weapons shrink to their workable hours. A Tiger rules after dark on the right street with infantry screens. A veteran interceptor is lethal if the weather closes and arcs loosen. A flak wagon bites if a pilot grows greedy. But the legend that nerve plus a strong machine could bully daylight loses its schedule. The first burst, the defining second, belongs to the checklist side now. Legacy outruns the front line. The M2 will outlive the war and speak in other climates on other mounts because simplicity and standard parts travel well. Post-war doctrine keeps the lesson in a quiet drawer. Ubiquity beats rarity when the fight is measured in hours and miles. For Germany, the lesson is harsher, but no less technical excellence without fuel training and protected movement is theatre. What wins in the morning must be able to appear again in the afternoon. Two questions refuse silence. If the escort's freedom and the gridded armed reconnaissance had matured 6 months earlier, does the Ardennes gamble lose the road net it needed before it could begin? If the Tiger and Panther remain the better machines in museum terms did, they already lose the moment their survival depended on trucks and rails that a half-inch tool could punish at will. The footage of that frost road near Cologne does not become famous. It becomes typical. That is the point. In the days after, both sides teach from it without saying its name. A German captain writes, "Avoid day movement under clear skies" for the third time and underlines again. An American sergeant taps a chalk circle where the tracer's printed through a boiler dome and says 2 seconds, and no one asks for a braver word. Next, we will count what 8 Brownings and a radial engine did to an army that needed roads to be roads. The P-47 flying bulldozer is not a nickname. It is a ledger of bridges, trains and columns paid for at half an inch.